Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other kids in her neighborhood. While most children her age spent their afternoons playing video games or scrolling through social media, she could be found in the local community center's basement, learning the ancient art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. At 17, she had already earned her blue belt, a significant achievement that spoke volumes about her dedication and natural talent. The dojo where Sarah trained was nothing fancy. Located beneath a small shopping plaza in East Oakland, it had concrete floors, fluorescent lighting that flickered occasionally, and the perpetual smell of sweat mixed with disinfectant. But, for Sarah, this place was sacred ground. Here, she had learned not just how to fight, but how to think strategically, how to remain calm under pressure, and, most importantly, how to respect both herself and her opponents. Sarah's journey into martial arts had begun when she was 12 years old. Her mother, Rosa, worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, often leaving Sarah to navigate the rough streets of their neighborhood alone. After a particularly frightening incident where Sarah had been cornered by a group of older kids demanding her lunch money, Rosa decided her daughter needed to learn how to protect herself. The first time Sarah walked into Master Chen's dojo, she was intimidated by the sight of teenagers and adults grappling on the mats, their movements fluid and purposeful. Master Chen, a 60-year-old man with kind eyes and calloused hands, had taken one look at the nervous girl and smiled. "Size doesn't matter here," he had told her. "What matters is heart, technique, and respect." Over the years, Sarah had absorbed these lessons like a sponge. She learned that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wasn't about aggression or dominance, but about using an opponent's strength against them, about finding leverage where others saw only disadvantage. She discovered that the smallest person could defeat someone twice their size with the right technique and mindset. As she progressed through the ranks, Sarah also learned about the culture of respect that permeated the martial arts community. Students bowed to their instructors, helped clean the mats after training, and looked out for one another both inside and outside the dojo. When new students joined, experienced practitioners were expected to guide them, to help them learn not just the physical techniques but the mental discipline that made martial arts a way of life. Sarah had embraced this responsibility wholeheartedly. She remembered her own early days, when everything seemed impossible and she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the techniques. Now, as one of the more experienced students in her age group, she took pride in helping newcomers find their footing. She would demonstrate techniques slowly, offer encouraging words when someone struggled, and always emphasize the importance of safety and control. The concept of control was paramount in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Unlike striking arts, where power and speed were often the determining factors, BJJ required practitioners to develop a subtle understanding of pressure, timing, and positioning. A choke hold, for instance, wasn't about applying brute force to someone's neck. It was about precise positioning of the arms, understanding anatomy, and applying just enough pressure to achieve the desired result while maintaining complete control. Sarah had spent countless hours practicing these techniques, first on willing partners who understood the drill, then in live sparring sessions where the margin for error was smaller. She had been choked unconscious herself more times than she could count during her years of training, each experience teaching her something new about the technique, about her own limits, and about the trust required between training partners. Trust was indeed the foundation of everything they did in the dojo. When someone placed their arm around your neck in a rear naked choke, you had to trust that they would release the pressure the moment you tapped out. When you were practicing submissions, you had to trust that your partner would stop before causing any real damage. This trust created bonds between training partners that often extended far beyond the mats. Master Chen had always emphasized that with great skill came great responsibility. "A black belt is not a license to hurt people," he would say during his weekly philosophy sessions. "It is a commitment to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to use your skills only when absolutely necessary, and to always remember that true strength comes from restraint, not from the ability to cause harm." These words had shaped Sarah's approach to martial arts and to life. She had never used her skills outside the dojo except for one occasion when she had helped a smaller student escape from bullies at school. Even then, she had used only the minimal force necessary to create an opportunity for escape, exactly as Master Chen had taught her. Sarah's reputation in the dojo was built on her technical proficiency, her calm demeanor, and her willingness to help others. She was known for her patience with new students, her creative problem-solving during sparring sessions, and her ability to remain composed even in the most challenging situations. Other students often sought her out for advice, not just about technique but about handling the mental aspects of training. The dojo had become a second family for Sarah. She had grown up alongside many of her training partners, sharing victories and defeats, supporting each other through difficult times, and celebrating each other's achievements. They had attended each other's belt promotions, helped each other prepare for competitions, and formed friendships that extended well beyond their shared love of martial arts. As Sarah approached her senior year of high school, she had begun thinking about college and what she wanted to do with her life. She was considering studying sports psychology, fascinated by the mental aspects of athletic performance that she had observed firsthand in her years of training. She had also thought about becoming a physical therapist, inspired by her mother's work in healthcare and her own understanding of how the body moved and functioned. But all of these future plans seemed secondary to her immediate love of training. Every day after school, Sarah would make her way to the dojo, changing into her well-worn gi and stepping onto the mats with a sense of anticipation and joy. This was her sanctuary, her place of learning and growth, where she felt most like herself. The evening that would change everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at the dojo around 6 o'clock, as was her routine. The afternoon children's classes had just ended, and the adult evening session was about to begin. She greeted Master Chen with a respectful bow, exchanged pleasantries with her regular training partners, and began her warm-up routine. Among the students present that evening were several faces Sarah didn't recognize. Master Chen had mentioned that a nearby dojo had closed unexpectedly, and some of its former students were looking for a new place to train. He had welcomed them to visit and see if the culture and teaching style at their school was a good fit. Sarah had noticed the visitors during the warm-up, but hadn't given them much thought. New people visited the dojo regularly, some stayed and became part of the community, others found that the school wasn't quite what they were looking for. It was all part of the natural ebb and flow of a martial arts academy. As the class progressed through technique instruction, Sarah found herself partnered with different people as Master Chen rotated the groups. This was normal practice, designed to give everyone experience working with partners of different sizes, skill levels, and approaches to the art. Sarah enjoyed these rotations because they challenged her to adapt her technique and communication style to work effectively with different types of people. When it came time for the drilling portion of the class, Master Chen announced that they would be working on rear naked chokes and defenses. This was a fundamental technique in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, one that Sarah had practiced thousands of times with dozens of different partners. She knew the technique inside and out, both from the attacking and defending perspectives. The drill was straightforward. One person would apply a rear naked choke while their partner practiced proper defense and escape techniques. They would switch roles every few minutes, giving both people the opportunity to work both sides of the technique. Emphasis was placed on control, proper form, and gradual application of pressure to allow the defending person time to work their escapes. Sarah was paired with one of the visiting students, a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. He was significantly larger than Sarah, probably outweighing her by at least 50 pounds, but this wasn't unusual. Sarah regularly trained with people much larger than herself, and she had learned to use technique and leverage to overcome size disadvantages. As they began the drill, Sarah noticed that her partner seemed eager to prove himself. His movements were aggressive and rushed, lacking the controlled precision that characterized good technique. When it was his turn to apply the choke, he positioned himself behind Sarah and wrapped his arm around her neck with more force than was appropriate for a drilling session. In a proper rear naked choke, the attacking person should slide their arm under their opponent's chin, positioning the crook of their elbow directly under the jawline. The free hand then grabs the bicep of the choking arm, while the choking arm hand is placed on the back of the opponent's head. Pressure is applied gradually and systematically, allowing the defending person time to work their escape or tap out if necessary. What Sarah's partner was doing bore little resemblance to proper technique. Instead of sliding under her chin, his arm was pressed directly against her throat in a way that cut off her airway immediately. Instead of applying gradual pressure, he squeezed with sudden, maximum force. Instead of maintaining the controlled positioning that would allow for a clean release, he had wrapped his other arm around her in a way that made it difficult for him to let go quickly. Sarah immediately recognized that something was wrong. This wasn't how the technique was supposed to be applied, and it wasn't safe. She tapped his arm firmly, the universal signal in martial arts that meant stop immediately. In every legitimate martial arts school, the tap was sacred. No matter what was happening, no matter how intense the action, everything stopped the moment someone tapped. But her partner didn't stop. If anything, he seemed to squeeze harder, his arm crushing against her windpipe with increasing pressure. Sarah tapped again, more urgently this time, her hand slapping against his arm in a way that should have been impossible to miss or ignore. Still, he continued to squeeze. Sarah felt her air supply being cut off, felt the panic beginning to rise in her chest as her body's natural alarm systems activated. This was no longer a drilling exercise. This had become something dangerous, something that violated every principle of safe training that she had learned over the years. Around them, other pairs continued their drilling, unaware of what was happening. The ambient noise of instruction and conversation masked any sound Sarah might have been able to make. Master Chen was on the other side of the room, working with a different group of students. As the pressure increased and her vision began to tunnel, Sarah realized that this wasn't an accident or a case of poor technique. The way her partner was positioned, the deliberate nature of his grip, the fact that he was ignoring her taps, all of it pointed to something intentional. For reasons she couldn't understand, this person was trying to hurt her. In that moment, Sarah had a choice to make. She could continue to rely on the normal protocols of the dojo, hoping that someone would notice what was happening and intervene. She could try to endure the situation, assuming that her partner would eventually come to his senses and release the hold. Or she could take matters into her own hands and use her training to defend herself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was being attacked in the one place where she should have been safest. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident. This was someone using the cover of legitimate training to assault her, betting that the controlled environment of the dojo would prevent her from defending herself effectively. Sarah's mind raced through her options as her oxygen-deprived brain began to struggle. She thought about all the hours she had spent learning to escape from exactly this position, all the techniques Master Chen had taught her, all the sparring sessions where she had worked her way out of seemingly impossible situations. But, more than that, she thought about who she was and what she had spent years becoming. She wasn't just some random victim who had stumbled into a dangerous situation. She was Sarah Martinez, blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, student of Master Chen, protector of newer students, someone who had earned her place on these mats through years of dedication and hard work. As consciousness began to slip away and her survival instincts fully engaged, Sarah made her decision. She wasn't going to be a victim in her own sanctuary. She wasn't going to let someone use her sacred space to hurt her. And she certainly wasn't going to let this attack succeed without showing this person exactly who he was dealing with. The transformation that came over Sarah in that moment would become the stuff of dojo legend, but, more importantly, it would mark a turning point in her understanding of herself and her capabilities. She had always known she was skilled, but she had never had to use those skills when her life was actually on the line. As her vision narrowed and her breath became a distant memory, Sarah Martinez prepared to remind her attacker of something he had clearly forgotten. In this place, on these mats, she was not prey. She was a predator, and he had just made the mistake of backing her into a corner with nowhere left to run. The real fight was about to begin. The seconds stretched like hours as Sarah felt her consciousness slipping away. The arm crushing her windpipe belonged to someone who clearly had no intention of honoring the sacred trust that existed between training partners. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was no longer a drill, no longer a learning exercise, but a genuine assault disguised as martial arts practice. Sarah's mind, even as it fought against oxygen deprivation, began to catalog everything Master Chen had taught her about escape techniques. The human body, he had explained, was remarkably adaptable and strong when survival was at stake. Years of training had prepared her for exactly this moment, though she had never imagined she would need to use these skills against someone in her own dojo. The first technique that came to mind was one of the most fundamental escapes from a rear naked choke, the chin tuck. By tucking her chin down and forward, she could create space between her throat and her attacker's arm, potentially buying herself precious seconds to breathe and think. Sarah forced her chin down with every ounce of strength she had left, feeling some of the pressure release from her windpipe. The relief was minimal but immediate. Air, precious and sweet, flowed back into her lungs in a thin stream. Her vision, which had been closing in from the edges, stabilized for a moment. More importantly, the brief respite allowed her to think more clearly about her next move. Her attacker seemed surprised by her resistance. Perhaps he had expected her to simply pass out quietly, making his assault look like nothing more than an overzealous training partner who didn't know his own strength. But Sarah's defensive movement had disrupted his plan, and she could feel him adjusting his grip, trying to re-establish the chokehold. This adjustment was exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, every movement created opportunities for counter-movement. When an opponent shifted their position to improve their attack, they inevitably created openings that a skilled defender could exploit. Master Chen had drilled this concept into all of his students: your opponent's strength can become their weakness if you know how to redirect it. As her attacker loosened his grip to readjust, Sarah implemented the second part of her escape plan. She reached up and grabbed his choking arm with both of her hands, not to pull it away from her throat, which would have been futile given the size difference, but to control its position and prevent him from re-establishing the proper chokehold. At the same time, she shifted her weight forward and dropped her center of gravity, a movement that would make it much more difficult for him to maintain his position behind her. This technique, known as breaking posture, was designed to disrupt an attacker's balance and create opportunities for escape or reversal. Sarah felt her attacker's balance shift as he struggled to compensate for her forward movement. He was stronger than her, certainly, but strength without proper technique and positioning was often useless in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. By changing the dynamics of their engagement, Sarah was forcing him to react to her movements rather than allowing him to control the situation. The next part of her escape required perfect timing and complete commitment. Sarah had to create enough space to turn and face her attacker, transforming the situation from a rear attack where she was at a severe disadvantage to a face-to-face confrontation where her technical skills could be more effectively employed. Using her grip on his arm as an anchor point, Sarah suddenly rotated her entire body to the left, a movement that martial artists call shrimping because of its resemblance to the way a shrimp curls its body. This rotation served multiple purposes: it created distance between her body and his, it disrupted his base and balance, and it positioned her to see his face and read his intentions. As she completed the rotation, Sarah found herself face to face with her attacker for the first time since the assault had begun. What she saw in his eyes confirmed her worst suspicions. This wasn't confusion or ignorance about proper drilling technique. This was malice, pure and simple. He had intended to hurt her, had planned to use the cover of legitimate training to assault her, and was now angry that his plan wasn't working. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snarled, his voice low and threatening. The mask of the polite visiting student had completely fallen away, revealing someone who clearly had no respect for the traditions and safety protocols of the martial arts community. Sarah didn't waste breath on a response. Words were for later, after she had ensured her safety and the safety of everyone else in the dojo. Right now, she needed to neutralize this threat and alert Master Chen to what was happening. But her attacker wasn't finished. Apparently frustrated by her successful escape from his chokehold, he lunged forward, trying to grab her and re-establish his dominant position. This was perhaps the biggest mistake he could have made, because it meant he was now attacking her in the area where she was most skilled and experienced. Sarah's years of training took over completely. As he reached for her, she captured his extended arm in what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners call an arm drag. This technique involved redirecting his forward momentum while simultaneously moving her body to a position of advantage relative to his. The beauty of an arm drag was that it used an attacker's own energy against them. The harder and faster they came forward, the more dramatically they could be redirected and off-balanced. Sarah had practiced this technique thousands of times with partners of all sizes, and she knew exactly how to make it work against someone larger and stronger than herself. As she executed the arm drag, Sarah felt her attacker's weight shift past her, his momentum carrying him forward into empty space where he had expected to find her. At the same moment, she pivoted behind him, reversing their positions so that now she was the one with the positional advantage. But Sarah wasn't interested in maintaining a grappling exchange with someone who had already proven he couldn't be trusted to follow the rules of engagement. She needed to create distance, alert the instructor, and ensure that this person was removed from the dojo before he could hurt anyone else. As her attacker stumbled forward, off-balanced by his failed grab attempt and her successful counter, Sarah took several quick steps backward, putting distance between them while simultaneously raising her voice to get attention from the rest of the class. "Stop," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the dojo. "This isn't a drill." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every conversation stopped, every technique demonstration paused, and every pair of eyes in the room turned towards Sarah and her attacker. Master Chen, who had been working with a group of students on the other side of the room, immediately began moving in their direction, his experienced eye quickly assessing the situation. Sarah's attacker seemed to realize that his opportunity for a covert assault had passed. The attention of the entire class was now focused on them, and there was no way he could continue his attack without it being obvious to everyone present that he was the aggressor. "It was just a drill," he said loudly, his voice taking on an injured tone that suggested Sarah was overreacting to normal training intensity. "She's being dramatic about nothing." But Sarah wasn't going to let him control the narrative. She had spent too many years in this dojo, built too many relationships, earned too much respect to allow someone to dismiss a genuine assault as just a drill. "Check my throat," she said to Master Chen as he approached, her voice slightly hoarse from the pressure that had been applied to her windpipe. "Look at the marks on my neck. That wasn't drilling. That was an attack." Master Chen's expression grew grave as he observed the red marks on Sarah's throat, marks that clearly showed where excessive pressure had been applied in a way that went far beyond normal training intensity. His experienced eye could immediately distinguish between the minor marks that sometimes resulted from legitimate practice and the deeper impressions that indicated someone had been applying dangerous levels of force. "Everyone stop what you're doing," Master Chen announced to the class, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been teaching martial arts for over 30 years. "This training session is over. Please sit along the wall while I address this situation." The other students, recognizing the seriousness in their instructor's tone, immediately complied. Many of them had noticed that something seemed wrong during the preceding moments, but the structured environment of the class had prevented them from intervening. Now, as they took their positions along the wall, several students approached Sarah to check on her condition and offer support. Sarah's regular training partners, people who had known her for years and understood her character and competence, were particularly concerned. They knew that Sarah was not someone who would cry wolf or exaggerate a situation for attention. If she said something was wrong, then something was genuinely wrong. "Are you okay?" asked Maria, a brown belt who had been training alongside Sarah for over 3 years. "Do you need medical attention?" Sarah appreciated the concern, but she was more focused on ensuring that the situation was properly addressed and that her attacker didn't have the opportunity to hurt anyone else. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was still rough. "But he needs to be removed from here. He's dangerous." Her attacker, meanwhile, was trying to maintain his story that nothing inappropriate had happened. "I don't know what her problem is," he said to another visiting student. "We were just drilling like everyone else. Maybe she's not used to training with someone who actually knows what they're doing." This comment drew sharp looks from several of Sarah's training partners, people who knew exactly how skilled and experienced she was. The suggestion that Sarah Martinez, one of the most technically proficient students in the school, was somehow intimidated by or unfamiliar with proper training was insulting and clearly false. Master Chen, who had been quietly observing the interactions and assessing the evidence, finally spoke. His voice was calm but carried an undertone of steel that every serious martial artist learns to recognize and respect. "Sir," he said, addressing Sarah's attacker directly, "you need to leave my school immediately. You are no longer welcome here." The visiting student's facade of innocence began to crack. "You can't be serious," he protested. "You're going to take the word of some girl over a fellow martial artist? I've been training longer than she has. I know what I'm doing." "Actually," said Master Chen, "I know exactly what you were doing. And I know exactly what she was doing. The marks on her throat, the way you ignored her taps, the excessive force you applied, none of that is consistent with proper drilling or legitimate training. You violated the most basic principles of safe practice, and you put one of my students in danger. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward her instructor. Master Chen had immediately recognized the situation for what it was and was taking appropriate action to protect her and the other students. This was exactly the kind of response she had hoped for, the kind of support that made the dojo feel like a true sanctuary. But her attacker wasn't ready to accept defeat gracefully. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You're all just protecting your little princess here. In a real school, students learn to handle some intensity." This comment caused several of Sarah's training partners to stand up, their body language making it clear that they were prepared to physically remove the visiting student if necessary. The suggestion that their school wasn't real or that Sarah needed special protection was deeply offensive to people who knew how hard she had worked and how much she had earned her place in their community. Sarah realized that the situation was escalating in a way that could become dangerous for everyone involved. She had successfully defended herself and alerted the instructor to the problem, but now she needed to help ensure that the resolution didn't create additional problems. "I don't need anyone to protect me," she said, her voice steady and clear despite the soreness in her throat. "I proved that when I escaped from your attack and put you on your back. But I won't stand by and watch you disrespect my instructor, my school, or my training partners." Her words seemed to hit home with her attacker, who apparently hadn't expected her to be so articulate and confident in the aftermath of his assault. He had probably assumed that she would be traumatized or intimidated, making it easier for him to control the narrative about what had happened. Instead, he found himself facing someone who was not only physically capable of defending herself but also emotionally strong enough to stand up to his attempts at intimidation and manipulation. Sarah Martinez was not going to be anyone's victim, and she certainly wasn't going to allow herself to be blamed for defending herself against an unprovoked attack. "I think," said Master Chen, "that it's time for you to leave. Now. If you're not off my property in the next 60 seconds, I'll be calling the police to have you removed." The visiting student looked around the room, perhaps hoping to find support among the other students or at least some indication that he could salvage the situation. What he found instead were the united faces of a martial arts community that had closed ranks around one of their own. In that moment, Sarah realized that this incident, traumatic as it had been, had also demonstrated something beautiful about the place where she had spent so many years training. These weren't just people who happened to study the same martial art. They were a family, bound together by shared values of respect, protection, and mutual support. As her attacker finally gathered his belongings and headed toward the exit, muttering complaints about politics and unfairness, Sarah felt a profound sense of vindication. She had defended herself successfully, she had been supported by her community, and she had proven that the principles Master Chen had taught her about courage and integrity weren't just abstract concepts but practical tools for navigating real-world challenges. But, as the immediate crisis passed, Sarah began to realize that this incident would have implications that extended far beyond this single evening. She had been forced to confront the reality that even in places that should be safe, even among people who should be trustworthy, danger could still emerge without warning. The question now was what she would do with that knowledge, and how this experience would shape her approach to training, to self-defense, and to life itself. The silence that followed the departure of Sarah's attacker was heavy with unspoken emotions. Students who had witnessed the incident sat quietly along the walls of the dojo, processing what they had just seen. For many of them, this was their first exposure to the reality that martial arts skills might actually be needed for real self-defense rather than just sport or personal development. Master Chen looked around the room, his experienced eyes taking in the faces of his students. He could see confusion, anger, concern, and, in some cases, fear. This was exactly the kind of situation that could either strengthen a martial arts community or tear it apart, depending on how it was handled in the immediate aftermath. "Sarah," he said gently, "how are you feeling? Do you need medical attention, or would you like someone to drive you home?" Sarah appreciated her instructor's concern, but she wasn't ready to leave yet. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still coursing through her system, and she felt a need to process what had happened before returning to the normal world outside the dojo. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was still slightly hoarse. "But I think we should talk about what just happened." "All of us." Master Chen nodded approvingly. Sarah's instinct to use this incident as a learning opportunity rather than simply trying to forget about it demonstrated the kind of maturity and wisdom that had made her one of his most respected students. "You're absolutely right," he said. "Everyone, please come sit in a circle. We need to discuss what we just witnessed and what it means for all of us." As the students arranged themselves in a loose circle on the mats, Sarah found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had occurred. She had always known intellectually that the skill she was learning could be used for self-defense, but she had never experienced the emotional reality of having to fight off a genuine attack. The experience had been both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it had forced her to confront the fact that predators could appear anywhere, even in places that should be safe. Empowering because it had proven to her that years of training had indeed prepared her to handle such situations effectively. "First," said Master Chen, addressing the group, "I want to make something very clear. What happened here tonight was not normal training, and it was not acceptable behavior. The individual who attacked Sarah violated every principle we teach about respect, control, and safety." Several students nodded, but Sarah could see that some of them still seemed confused about exactly what had transpired. The incident had happened quickly, and, from a distance, it might have looked like normal drilling that simply got a bit intense. "Sarah," Master Chen continued, "would you be willing to explain to everyone what you experienced? I think it would help all of us understand the difference between legitimate training and what happened to you tonight." Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. She knew that her explanation could serve as an important educational moment for her fellow students, helping them recognize similar situations if they ever encountered them. "When we started drilling," she began, "everything seemed normal at first. But, as soon as he put his arm around my neck, I could tell something was wrong. He wasn't applying the technique the way we've been taught. Instead of sliding under my chin and applying gradual pressure, he crushed his arm directly against my windpipe with maximum force." Several students winced at this description, understanding immediately how dangerous such an application could be. "When I tapped," Sarah continued, "he didn't stop. He actually squeezed harder. I tapped multiple times, clearly and urgently, and he completely ignored it. That's when I knew this wasn't drilling anymore. This was an attack." The gravity of this statement settled over the group. The tap was sacred in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and all legitimate martial arts. Ignoring a tap wasn't just poor sportsmanship or overly aggressive training, it was a fundamental violation of the trust that made safe practice possible. "How did you escape?" asked James, a purple belt who had been training at the school for several years. Sarah smiled slightly, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Everything Master Chen taught us about escapes and reversals. I tucked my chin to create breathing room, controlled his arm position, broke his posture by shifting my weight forward, and then used an arm drag when he tried to grab me again. The techniques worked exactly the way they're supposed to work," Master Chen added. Sarah's escape was textbook perfect. She stayed calm under pressure, applied her technical knowledge systematically, and created the distance she needed to alert the rest of us to what was happening. This explanation seemed to help several students understand both the seriousness of what had occurred and the effectiveness of the skills they were learning. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen their training techniques used in a genuine self-defense situation. "But why would someone do that?" asked Lisa, a white belt who had been training for only a few months. "Why would someone come to a martial arts class just to hurt someone?" Master Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Unfortunately, there are people who see martial arts schools as hunting grounds. They know that the controlled environment makes it easier to assault someone while making it look like normal training. They prey on the trust and respect that legitimate students show to training partners." Sarah felt a chill as she realized how calculated her attacker's approach had been. He hadn't simply lost control during drilling or applied too much pressure by accident. He had deliberately chosen her as a target and used the cover of legitimate training to assault her. That's exactly why we emphasize the importance of the tap, Master Chen continued. And why we stress that everyone has the right to stop any drill or sparring session at any time for any reason. Your safety is always more important than completing a technique or maintaining the flow of practice. Several students asked additional questions about recognizing inappropriate behavior, about what to do if they found themselves in similar situations, and about how to help fellow students who might be experiencing problems. Master Chen answered each question patiently, using the incident as an opportunity to reinforce important safety concepts. As the discussion continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the moment when she had made the decision to fight back. There had been a split second when she could have chosen to endure the attack, hoping that someone else would notice and intervene. Instead, she had chosen to take control of the situation herself. "I want to say something," Sarah announced when there was a pause in the conversation. "What happened tonight was scary, and it was wrong. But it also proved something important to me about our training and about this community." The other students turned their attention to her, waiting to hear what insights she had gained from her experience. "When I was being attacked, I could have panicked. I could have hoped that someone else would save me. Instead, everything I've learned here kicked in automatically. My body knew what to do because we've practiced these techniques so many times. My mind stayed calm because Master Chen has taught us that technique beats strength when applied correctly." Several students smiled at this, recognizing the lesson that their instructor repeated frequently during classes. "But, more than that," Sarah continued, "when I called for help, every single person in this room immediately supported me. Nobody questioned my judgment. Nobody suggested that I was overreacting. You all recognized that something was wrong, and you stood with me." Maria, the brown belt who had been one of the first to check on Sarah after the incident, spoke up. "That's what we do here. We look out for each other. We're not just training partners, we're family." This sentiment was echoed by several other students, and Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the community she had found in this basement dojo. The incident had been traumatic, but it had also demonstrated the strength of the bonds between the people who trained together. Master Chen allowed the students to share their thoughts and feelings for several more minutes before bringing the discussion to a close. "I want everyone to remember what we've talked about tonight," he said. "The techniques we practice here are powerful tools, and with power comes responsibility. You all have the ability to protect yourselves and others, but you also have the obligation to use that ability wisely." As the class officially ended and students began to gather their belongings, several people approached Sarah to check on her one more time and to express their admiration for how she had handled the situation. The support and encouragement she received helped to reinforce her sense that she had done the right thing by fighting back and speaking up. But even as Sarah felt supported by her martial arts community, she was beginning to understand that the incident would have implications that extended beyond the dojo. She had been forced to confront the reality that predators existed and that they could strike anywhere, even in places that should be safe. Over the following days and weeks, Sarah found herself thinking frequently about the attack and its aftermath. She experienced a range of emotions: anger at her attacker, gratitude for her training, pride in her successful defense, and occasional flashes of anxiety about the possibility of future incidents. She also found herself paying more attention to her surroundings in general, not out of paranoia but out of a heightened awareness of the importance of situational awareness. The incident had taught her that danger could emerge suddenly, and, without warning, even in familiar environments. At the same time, Sarah's confidence in her abilities had grown significantly. She had been tested in a real-world situation and had proven to herself that her training was effective. This knowledge gave her a sense of empowerment that extended into other areas of her life. Her friends and family members who heard about the incident reacted with a mixture of concern and admiration. Her mother, Rosa, was initially worried that martial arts training might be too dangerous, but she ultimately felt proud that her daughter had been able to defend herself effectively. "I always knew you were strong," Rosa told her daughter. "But seeing you handle something like that with such grace and courage, it makes me realize that you've grown into someone truly special." Sarah's classmates at school also heard about the incident, and their reactions varied widely. Some were impressed by her martial arts skills and her ability to defend herself. Others seemed uncomfortable with the idea that their quiet, studious classmate was capable of such decisive physical action. But the reaction that mattered most to Sarah came from her fellow martial artists. In the days following the incident, she noticed that other students sought her out more frequently for advice and guidance. They seemed to view her not just as a skilled training partner but as someone who had proven herself in a genuinely dangerous situation. This newfound respect brought with it additional responsibilities. Newer students began asking her questions about self-defense situations, about how to stay calm under pressure, and about how to recognize when someone's behavior during training was inappropriate. Sarah embraced these teaching opportunities, sharing the lessons she had learned while being careful not to present herself as an expert on personal safety. She understood that her experience, while valuable, was just one example of how training could be applied in real-world situations. Master Chen also began using Sarah's experience as a teaching tool during regular classes. With her permission, he would reference the incident when explaining the importance of proper technique, the sanctity of the tap, and the need to maintain situational awareness even in familiar environments. Sarah's experience teaches us that the skills we practice here aren't just for sport or fitness, he would tell new students. They're life skills that could someday save your life or the life of someone you care about. As weeks turned into months, Sarah found that the incident had changed her relationship with martial arts in subtle but important ways. She had always enjoyed training, but now she approached it with a deeper sense of purpose. Every technique she learned, every drill she practiced, every sparring session she participated in was colored by the knowledge that these skills might someday be needed for real self-defense. This heightened sense of purpose also led Sarah to take on more responsibility within the dojo community. She began helping Master Chen with teaching duties, particularly when it came to working with new students who might be nervous or intimidated by the physical nature of martial arts training. Her patient, encouraging teaching style helped many beginners overcome their initial fears and develop confidence in their abilities. Sarah understood firsthand how important it was for students to believe in themselves and their training, because that belief might someday be the difference between surviving an attack and becoming a victim. The incident also strengthened Sarah's resolve to pursue a career that would allow her to help others develop the physical and mental skills they needed to protect themselves. Her interest in sports psychology grew stronger as she reflected on the mental aspects of her successful defense. She began reading books about the psychology of self-defense, about how people respond to dangerous situations, and about how training could be designed to prepare students for the emotional realities of violence. This knowledge enriched her understanding of her own experience while providing her with tools to help others prepare for similar challenges. As her senior year of high school drew to a close, Sarah found herself applying to colleges with strong programs in both martial arts and psychology. She knew that she wanted to spend her life helping others develop the skills and confidence they needed to protect themselves and their loved ones. The attack that had seemed so traumatic at the time had ultimately become a defining moment in Sarah's life, clarifying her values, strengthening her resolve, and pointing her toward a future dedicated to empowering others through martial arts training. 2 years had passed since the incident that changed everything for Sarah Martinez. Now a sophomore at State University studying sports psychology with a minor in criminal justice, she had transformed her traumatic experience into a powerful force for positive change in the martial arts community and beyond. The university's martial arts club had welcomed Sarah with open arms when she arrived on campus. Word of her experience and her teaching abilities had preceded her, and the club's instructor, Professor Williams, had immediately invited her to assist with classes. Under their joint leadership, the club had grown from a small group of dedicated students to one of the most popular and respected organizations on campus. Sarah's approach to teaching had evolved significantly since her high school days. While she maintained the patient, encouraging style that had made her effective with beginners, she now incorporated specific training modules focused on real-world self-defense applications. These sessions went beyond traditional technique instruction to address the psychological and emotional aspects of violent encounters. Most people think self-defense is about learning to punch and kick, Sarah would tell new students during orientation sessions. But the most important weapon you have is your mind. Your ability to recognize danger, make quick decisions, and execute techniques under pressure, that's what really matters when your safety is on the line. Her classes always included detailed discussions about situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, and the legal implications of using martial arts skills in self-defense situations. Sarah had learned from her own experience that surviving an attack was only part of the challenge. Understanding the aftermath and its implications was equally important. The university had been so impressed with Sarah's teaching methodology that they had asked her to develop a formal self-defense curriculum for the general student population. Working with the campus police department and the Women's Studies program, she had created a comprehensive course that combined practical techniques with education about personal safety and risk reduction. The course, officially titled Personal Safety and Situational Awareness, had become one of the most sought-after electives on campus. Students from all backgrounds and disciplines enrolled, drawn by Sarah's reputation as someone who had successfully defended herself in a real-world situation and could teach others to do the same. During one particularly memorable class session, a student named Jennifer had broken down while practicing escape techniques from a chokehold. The scenario had triggered memories of an abusive relationship from which she had recently escaped. Sarah had immediately stopped the class to provide support and counseling, helping Jennifer process her emotions while ensuring that she still learned the skills she needed to protect herself. "Your past doesn't define your future," Sarah had told Jennifer during a private conversation after class. "What happened to you was terrible, but it doesn't make you weak. Learning these skills isn't about becoming violent or paranoid, it's about reclaiming your power and your confidence." This kind of sensitive, individualized approach to instruction had become Sarah's trademark. She understood that many of her students came to martial arts training carrying emotional baggage from previous experiences with violence or intimidation. Her own journey from victim to survivor to empowered teacher gave her unique insights into how to help others navigate similar paths. Sarah's academic work was also flourishing. Her research focused on the psychological factors that determined whether people would successfully defend themselves during violent encounters. She had conducted extensive interviews with survivors of attacks, analyzing the mental processes that led to successful resistance versus submission or paralysis. Her preliminary findings had already been presented at 2 academic conferences, generating significant interest from researchers in related fields. The data suggested that prior martial arts training was less predictive of successful self-defense than psychological factors such as confidence, situational awareness, and the ability to make rapid decisions under pressure. Physical skills are important, Sarah had explained to a conference audience, but mental preparation is what determines whether those skills can be accessed and applied when they're actually needed. Someone with minimal training but strong psychological preparation might defend themselves more effectively than someone with years of training but no mental readiness for real violence. This research had practical implications for how self-defense training should be structured and delivered. Sarah's recommendations emphasized scenario-based training, stress inoculation, and extensive discussion of the mental and emotional aspects of violent encounters. The martial arts community had also taken notice of Sarah's work. She had been invited to conduct workshops at schools and tournaments across the region, sharing her insights about safety protocols and instructor responsibilities. Her presentation on recognizing and preventing training abuse had become a required component of instructor certification programs in several martial arts organizations. During one of these workshops, Sarah had encountered an instructor who challenged her emphasis on safety protocols. "You're making people paranoid," he had argued. "Martial arts have always involved risk. If students can't handle that, maybe they should take up chess instead." Sarah's response had been measured but firm. "There's a difference between appropriate risk that helps students grow and unnecessary danger that puts people in harm's way. When we ignore safety protocols or dismiss students' concerns, we create environments where predators can operate freely. That's not traditional martial arts, that's negligence." Her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about the martial arts community had sometimes made her unpopular with instructors who preferred to maintain the status quo. But it had also earned her respect from progressive teachers who recognized the need for reform and modernization. Sarah's personal life had also been shaped by her experience and its aftermath. She had begun dating Michael, a fellow martial artist she had met at a tournament during her freshman year. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values about the importance of martial arts as a tool for personal development rather than ego gratification. Michael had been initially intimidated by Sarah's reputation and experiences, but he had come to appreciate her strength and wisdom. "You've made me a better martial artist and a better person," he had told her on their one-year anniversary. "Watching how you handle challenges and help other people, it's inspiring." Their relationship faced unique challenges because of Sarah's past. She sometimes experienced nightmares about the attack, and certain training scenarios could trigger anxiety responses. Michael had learned to recognize these moments and provide support without being overprotective or dismissive. "Healing isn't linear," Sarah had explained to him during one difficult conversation. "I'm much stronger than I was before this happened, but that doesn't mean I'm not still processing it." Having someone who understands that makes all the difference. Sarah's family relationships had also evolved in the wake of her experience. Her mother Rosa had initially been protective to the point of worry, fearing that continued martial arts training might expose Sarah to additional dangers. But, as she witnessed her daughter's growth and success, Rosa had become one of her strongest supporters. "I used to think martial arts was about fighting," Rosa had confided during a recent visit to campus. "But, watching what you've done with your experience, how you've helped so many other people, I understand now that it's really about healing and empowerment." Even Sarah's extended family had been affected by her journey. Her younger cousin Maria had been inspired to begin martial arts training herself, and several family friends had enrolled their daughters in self-defense classes based on Sarah's recommendations. The ripple effects of that single incident continued to spread outward in ways Sarah was still discovering. She had received letters from students who had successfully defended themselves using techniques they learned in her classes. She had been contacted by parents whose children had gained confidence and direction through martial arts training inspired by her example. One particularly meaningful letter had come from a woman named Patricia who had read about Sarah's work in a magazine article. Patricia had been in an abusive marriage for 15 years, believing that she was too weak and too old to change her situation. After reading about Sarah's experience and philosophy, Patricia had enrolled in a local martial arts school and eventually found the courage to leave her husband. "You probably don't remember me," Patricia had written, "but I attended one of your workshops 2 years ago. Something you said about inner strength being more important than physical strength stayed with me. It took time, but I finally found the courage to reclaim my life. Thank you for showing me that it was possible." These stories reinforced Sarah's belief that her experience, painful as it had been, was part of a larger purpose. She was not just teaching self-defense techniques, she was helping people discover their own strength and resilience. As Sarah looked toward her future, she was considering several possible career paths. She had been accepted to a graduate program in clinical psychology with a specialization in trauma recovery. She was also exploring opportunities to work with law enforcement agencies to improve their understanding of self-defense situations and victim psychology. Another possibility was opening her own martial arts school, one specifically designed to serve survivors of violence and people seeking to develop confidence and self-protection skills. This school would implement all of the safety protocols and psychological insights she had developed through her research and experience. "Whatever I end up doing," Sarah had recently told her advisor, "I want it to be something that helps people understand their own strength. Too many people walk through life feeling powerless, not realizing that they have everything they need to protect themselves and the people they care about." The incident that had begun with an attack in a basement dojo had ultimately led Sarah to a life of purpose and service. She had transformed her moment of vulnerability into a source of strength, not just for herself but for countless others who had benefited from her teaching, research, and example. As she prepared for her junior year of college and the next phase of her journey, Sarah reflected on how much her understanding of strength had evolved. She had once thought strength was about physical technique and the ability to defeat opponents. Now she understood that true strength was about resilience, wisdom, and the courage to help others discover their own power. The young woman who had been attacked during a drilling session was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to transform trauma into purpose and fear into empowerment. Sarah Martinez had become exactly the kind of person she had needed during her darkest moment, a guide, teacher, and living example of the strength that exists within everyone who has the courage to claim it. Her story continued to unfold, touching new lives and creating new possibilities with each passing day. The attack that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, the start of a journey that would ultimately help hundreds of people discover their own capacity for courage, resilience, and self-protection. In quiet moments, when she was teaching a nervous student or comforting someone who had shared their own story of survival, Sarah sometimes thought about that moment when she had made her crucial decision. When faced with the choice between submission and resistance, between helplessness and empowerment, she had chosen to fight back with everything she had. That choice had changed everything, not just for her but for everyone whose life she had touched since. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose our response to adversity. And, sometimes, that choice can change not just our own life but the lives of countless others who are watching and hoping for proof that strength is possible, that healing is real, and that no one has to remain a victim forever. Sarah Martinez had become that proof, and her story continued to inspire new chapters of courage and empowerment in the lives of everyone fortunate enough to learn from her example.